Hello, today we are going to be looking at the active versus the passive voice constructions in sentences by you and others. But let's just take a look. First of all, 99% of the writing you are doing should probably be in the active voice. This is the simplest way to think of things doing stuff, I guess. Here, we're doing what you already know how to do. Subject, verb, direct object. And that should tell you that every verb that we're using today has to be transitive. If it's intransitive, you don't even have to worry because you can't have a direct object to kind of switch. I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let's look at an active voice construction. In fact, I think pretty much every sentence I've said so far has been an active voice construction because I have been doing something, or telling you to do something, or just, that's the way most language works. Subject, verb, and then if there's stuff after the verb, there's stuff after the verb. And in these sentences, there's always going to be stuff after the verb. There's going to be direct objects. And again, that makes all of these examples and sentences transitive verbs. The subject is doing something to something or someone. That is your direct object. Remember, the direct object asks who or what in regards to the subject-verb partnership. Okay? Now, that's what active means. Active means you do stuff, right? All of us, as human beings, should be active. That's why this should be the general rule. Be active. Do things. Have your subjects do the things in the sentences. But there are times where that might not be an option. I mean, maybe you don't even know who did what. Maybe the subject is unknown, or maybe the subject is not nearly as important as the action. So you're writing a sentence where you want to focus on the verb itself, or the action being done. And there we have our first example of the passive voice. Or perhaps you want to focus on the recipient of the action. In an active voice construction, that would be the direct object, the one receiving the action of the subject and the verb. However, if that recipient is more important, well, what do? You can change any active construction that has subject, transitive verb, direct object into the passive voice by simply taking the direct object and the subject and switching them around. But in order to do that, you have to know how to create a passive voice construction. And it's really simple. You have a passive subject, which was your direct object, but it's not doing anything. Instead, something is being done by the active object. Okay, so I know this can get a little confusing. Usually the subject is the one, the person, place, thing, or idea, doing something to the object. But in a passive construction, the passive subject, the one not doing anything, the one just kind of sitting there, is the noun that is receiving the action done by the active object. Okay? So, in order to understand this, let's just look at some examples. We painted the wall. If you can picture that in your mind, then you understand that we, me and my friends, we did something. We painted the wall, right? Like the Karate Kid. Up and down, painting the fence. But you know what? You probably don't even know what that means because you're too young and I'm too old. But just trust me, your parents might find it amusing. I don't know. If I switch that into a passive voice, then I could say, the wall was painted by us. Note that these are the same people. We is the subject pronoun. Us is the object pronoun. So obviously, this can't be the subject anymore. This is the object, and we are the ones doing the painting of the wall. Does that make sense? Let's look at the second example. The paint was dried by the sun. So here, is the paint doing anything? The paint is passive. It sits there and it receives the heat of the sun, and the sun dries the paint. So I can say it dried the paint. Obviously, it here is the sun from the previous sentence. It's the one doing the action. We're going to go through some more examples to make this all a little clearer. So let's take a look at some of these passive constructions in action. Oh, darn it, that doesn't really work. I mean, look, just remember that passive constructions are going to generally look like this. You're going to have a passive subject. The subject isn't doing anything. And then you're going to have some form of the be verb, a past participle of a transitive verb, and then if you know who is actually doing the action, you can have the active object. And keep in mind that this can look a little bit different according to the tense of your sentence, and we'll look at that a little bit. So remember that if you're focusing on the action, if the action is more important than the subject or the object, if it's the action that you're more interested in, then you might want to use the passive voice. An example might be, Rob was attacked by a bear! Or, Rob was attacked by a bear. What's the important thing here? Obviously, the active construction would be a bear attacked Rob. Do you really want to focus on the bear when your friend Rob is the one who was attacked? Probably not. We want to focus on the human having been attacked, by some crazy animal, okay? So here we're really focusing on the fact that the person is the recipient of a violent attack by a bear, okay? We're focusing on what we think is more important. And this can be a little subjective. It can be open to some interpretation of opinion. But that's one way in which you might want to use the passive voice. Focus on the human rather than the creature, and focus on the action being done. Imagine you walk home, open the door, and your house is a mess, and you didn't leave it like that, and you walk in and you declare, "We've been robbed." Do you know who did it? You have no idea. They're long gone with all of your valuables and your computer and your TV, and even that set of earrings that your grandmother left to your mother. You don't know who did the action. All you know is your stuff is missing. We, my family, has been robbed, okay? We have been robbed. Now, I could say someone has robbed us, okay? So remember, with the perfect tense, we don't know the time that this happened. We just enter in the present perfect. We enter the house and something has been done in the past, and we're entering into the consequence, okay? And this is that in a passive voice where we do not know by whom we have been robbed, okay? We have been robbed. That is the present perfect passive voice construction. This is the, contraction of we have. So have been robbed. And if we switch it around, again, we can have that unknown active subject. Someone has robbed us. Lastly, the message has been sent and received. Here, we actually have two things happening by two different actors. Again, either we don't know who they are or we don't care. Obviously, the same person or the same people did not both send and receive the message, but what we're saying here is that we're focusing on the recipient of these actions. So here you can see that you can have one passive subject. The message is not doing anything. The message is what has been sent by someone and has been received by someone else. And we want to focus on the message, the thing receiving these actions. But again, by whom? Either we don't know or we don't care. It's the message that has been important. So, as one final thought, you have to remember that because you're dealing with past participles, verbs can change from the active to the passive, right? I might say, I wrote a book. But I could also say, this book has been written by me. Okay? So both of those are telling you the same information. One focuses on me, the one who did the thing, and the other focuses on the thing that has been done by me. And you can get yours, details in person. I mean, this is not a big plug. Anyway, do your homework, watch the video, and let's review.
Active versus passive voice. What kind of verbs are able to be both active and passive? Transitive verbs can be both active and passive. Why might one use the passive voice? 3 reasons. One might use the passive voice to focus on the action in the sentence, focus on the recipient of the action, or if the subject is unknown. What is the most common pattern for the active voice? Subject, verb, object. What is the pattern for the passive voice? Passive subject noun, be plus past participle, by, active object noun if known. What is the biggest difference between the active and passive voice? The active voice has the subject doing or being something. The passive voice has the subject receiving an action. What is important to remember when using any past participle construction? It is important to remember whether or not the verb is regular or irregular. What can happen to irregular verbs when changing from active to passive or vice versa? The verb can change a lot. What is the title of the book written by B.F. Burden? The title of the book is The Rose. Did the last question use an active or passive voice? It used a passive voice. Go see for yourself.